So if the ranking member would like to go a little bit beyond, that would be all's fair. And I turn to Senator Grassley, Senator Padilla next, Senator Romney next, unless Senator Marshall returns.
Dr. Holzeken, our rising debt and deficits are cast by a lot of people as long-term challenge, quote unquote, long-term challenge. Something we will have to deal with in the future, but not immediate problem today. Is that really the case, or are we already living with the consequences of reckless spending and borrowing?
Well, I certainly believe the impacts are immediate and shouldn't be put off. Most people characterize the threat as something that looks like, you know, a Greece, Portugal sovereign debt meltdown that would happen somewhere in the future if we just did nothing. But the reality is that the mechanism I described in my opening remarks, the diminished productivity, the headwinds to raising the standard of living are going on in small amounts every single year. They might be too tiny to notice in the moment, but cumulatively, they are an enormous impact on our progress. And so I think it's something that needs to be rectified immediately, both in and of itself, but also because it would allow the Congress more flexibility in pursuing other policy objectives.
Also to you, in last week's State of the Union address, the president once again tried to portray himself as a deficit reducer. He pointed to last year's $1.4 trillion deficit, which was lower than the 2020 deficits due to cessation of bipartisan pandemic relief. So to you, how would you rate the president's budgetary performance so far?
I think the administration has done nothing to improve the budgetary outlook. Certainly, if you look back at 2021, the American Rescue Plan was an enormous policy error, something I said at the time, so it's not 2020 hindsight. This is a $2 trillion stimulus in an economy that was growing at 6.5%. It's too big, was unnecessary, was poorly designed, led to a lot of inflation, and this has been followed by several proposals called Build Back Better that did not add up in any meaningful way and would have added to the core structural deficit in the United States. He's taken administrative actions for hundreds of billions of dollars of student loan relief that are difficult for me to defend. So I don't see any activities being taken by the administration that are recognizing the problems that the federal budget faces, and we need some leadership on that front.
Dr. Carney, in last week's State of the Union address, President Biden admitted that the U.S. will need oil and gas, quote unquote, for a while. Your firm, Brookfield Asset Management, has invested in oil and gas infrastructure around the world. Do you believe that the U.S. government should mandate private institutions divest from their fossil fuel interests? And if so, what immediate impact would this have on the average American?
First thing, I agree with the president in the timeline and the continued need for fossil fuels. Secondly, I'll just note on Brookfield is one of the largest investors in renewable and operators of renewables in the world. Thirdly, no, I don't believe, and I've never advocated mandatory divestment of fossil fuel assets. In fact, to address the climate challenge, what is necessary is to get capital financing to where the emissions are and ensure that businesses can invest to get those emissions down. And that's been a consistent position I've had for more than a decade.
Yeah. I think you, I don't have a question, but you said, even though I have 1 and 12 seconds left, I'd like to just make a statement, but it's kind of a question for information from Dr. Litteran and Dr. Carney, and it deals with the ESG movements within finance, within banking. And I know you don't have to invest where you don't want to invest, but as a family farmer in Iowa, and my son Robin runs the family farm, but we're corn and soybean farmers. So let's just assume that the FDIC or some other regulator or bank say to the community bank in Parkersburg, Iowa, that you've got to make sure that you know what the carbon footprint is of the farmer. And in 60 years of farming, I don't know where to start to answer that question. And then I think, so what is the obligation? That banker's under an obligation to get that information for me, but if the farmer can't give the information, how does it get out? So this is what I'm thinking as a historic farming. When I started farming in 1960, you know, we'd make 10 trips across the field and produce maybe 60 bushel of corn to the acre. Today, with minimum tillage or no tillage, we make about 3 or 4 trips across. And we produce, in Iowa, I think the average farmer produced 204 bushel of corn to acre. So you can see that farmers already are producing unit of food with a lot less units of energy than they used to. And do we get any credit for that? I mean, we've already been helping the global warming issue with more efficient farming and all that. But that banker in Parkersburg can say to Chuck Grassley, you tell us what your carbon footprint is.
Yeah, Senator, it's not an issue of reporting what your carbon footprint is. We all have to be aware of what the carbon flux out of the atmosphere into the ground is. And there's tremendous opportunity for farmers to actually address this problem, to sequester carbon into their soil so they can change the way they farm. But we have to address the problem. We have to measure the carbon. We have to understand the science. There's a tremendous opportunity in farming, in ranching, and in timber lands to address this problem, and I hope we do.
Well, what do you think we've been doing? We've been using minimum tillage for 25 years, no-till for probably about that long.
Well, sadly, the farmers have not been compensated for the things that they have done to sequester carbon into the soil, and to be, you know, they are compensated for being more efficient, but we haven't recognized carbon. Carbon movement into and out of the atmosphere is something that we need to be aware of. We need to measure it, and we need to create incentives. We all understand this. We need to create incentives to reduce emissions. Let's just do it.
I'll flag the Growing Climate Solutions Act as an example to help farmers do that, which passed with big bipartisan numbers. Senator